At 5 a.m., I woke to a sound that didn't belong in my quiet street, a chorus of jackhammers hammering into earth, steel teeth tearing up the lawn I had manicured for years, spotlights glaring through my bedroom blinds as if the apocalypse had chosen my address as its epicenter. And then, just when I stumbled to the window in my robe, I saw it, a massive hole where my front garden used to be, yellow machinery grumbling, men in orange vests shouting directions, and a giant banner sagging between two metal poles that read in all caps "Future Subway Entrance HOA Project," and in that instant my coffee cup slipped from my fingers and shattered on the hardwood because my quiet suburban life had been hijacked by an absurd nightmare. I bolted outside barefoot, the cold morning air slicing my skin, my robe flapping like some desperate flag as I tried to wave down the first foreman, but all I got was a clipboard shoved in my face and a muttered "We're on a tight schedule, sir. This'll only take a few weeks." I could smell diesel fumes, wet earth, and my crushed rose bushes all at once, and beyond that the sound of neighbors applauding as if this chaos was a community fair. Karen, the HOA president with her pastel blazer and perpetual smirk, stood at the edge of the crater holding a microphone as if she were unveiling a monument, proclaiming that the new subway entrance would put our community on the map and raise property values, and she tossed her hair while my sprinkler heads rolled away like discarded dice. I told her she was out of her mind, that no one had asked me, that this was my property, my land, but she only flashed me a paper stamped with something that looked like a city seal and said, "Permit, sir, everything's legal and above board." The absurdity of it all stung more than the damage, because in my pocket rested the badge I had carried for years, the one that could have ended her speech in seconds, but I wasn't ready to show my hand. Instead I played the stunned homeowner, blinking against the sunrise while inside my mind turned like gears, calculating. I started filming with my phone, capturing every jackhammer, every drill, every smug clap from my neighbors who thought this would make their morning commute shorter. I spotted a bulldozer parked exactly where my wife had planted our anniversary tree, and the trunk now lay on its side like a defeated soldier. As I filmed, I began cataloging every detail to use later, because I knew a few things Karen and her crew did not. They didn't know that the permits they had were laughably outdated, that the department whose letterhead they used had been absorbed into my own agency years ago, and they certainly didn't know that the person whose property they were digging belonged to the chief of the very transit authority they were pretending to partner with. I slipped back into the house under the pretense of making calls to a lawyer, but instead I logged into the city database with my credentials, pulling up the coordinates of the dig, noting exactly how deep they had gone, which utilities they were about to slice open, and what kind of violations they had already racked up. I texted an old friend in engineering with a single line, got a live one at my address, and his response came seconds later, "Want me to roll a crew tonight?" I smiled for the first time that morning, a quiet grin that promised mayhem. Outside, Karen's voice rose into a speech about progress and vision, her words swallowed by the clang of machinery, but I could hear the edge of desperation too. She needed this to go off without a hitch because she had no idea how illegal it actually was. I watched a worker mark the sidewalk with spray paint arrows, pointing toward my driveway as if they were mapping the future of the city without even asking the man who ran it. My mind drifted to the Transit Authority conference room where I'd once vetoed a billion-dollar tunnel for safety reasons, and now here on my front lawn, a gaggle of amateurs were swinging pickaxes like it was a gold rush. My heart pounded not with fear but with anticipation. I knew that before the week was out Karen would regret every inch of soil she'd disturbed, every bolt she'd drilled, every camera she'd invited to cover her so-called grand project. And so as the sun rose higher and the scene outside my window looked more like a war zone than a neighborhood, I brewed a fresh cup of coffee, slipped my badge into my back pocket where it would press against me like a loaded weapon, and began writing the first notes of the counterstrike that would turn their fraudulent subway entrance into the greatest public humiliation our HOA had ever known. By the next morning the crater on my lawn looked less like a project and more like a crime scene waiting to happen, yet the HOA doubled down with even more trucks, more equipment, and a gaggle of volunteers wearing matching t-shirts emblazoned with some slogan about community progress, as if they were running a charity marathon rather than an illegal subway dig. I watched from my porch with the same calm as a chess player who knows the opponent has already walked into a trap, the badge in my pocket burning a hole against my leg, the city database on my laptop flashing violation after violation. Overnight I had discovered everything I needed to know. The so-called permits were from a defunct department that had been folded into my agency 5 years ago, the environmental impact assessments were missing, the labor insurance was fraudulent, and the very coordinates they had chosen sat on top of a sealed and forgotten utility tunnel that once connected to the old freight depot before the city rerouted everything underground. That tunnel was technically still under my authority, and I knew it better than anyone, including where the access points were and how to open them. So while the HOA clanged and dug above ground, I sent a quiet message to my engineering friend authorizing a survey team to work overnight under full transit authority credentials. We moved like ghosts, our official crews descending through a locked hatch at the end of the street to emerge directly beneath my yard, mapping the soil from below, setting up a lattice of sensors to monitor every vibration. It was like building a stage beneath a circus act, letting them perform their spectacle while we prepared the grand reveal. Karen meanwhile strutted across the edge of the pit in her pink blazer, barking at foremen to speed up the work, her eyes flicking nervously toward the local news van she had invited to document her triumph. She had grown cocky overnight, now promising a ribbon cutting in 2 weeks, claiming that a direct subway entrance would make our neighborhood a landmark. Her voice carried the thin edge of someone bluffing, and I watched as she held up another sheet of paper to a camera, calling it an official letter of support from City Transit. I almost choked on my coffee because it was my own agency's logo printed badly, pixelated and crooked, and I recognized the signature as one of my retired deputies who now lived in Florida. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. I decided not to confront her publicly yet. Instead I walked down to the edge of the hole as if still in shock and asked casual questions about timelines, safety protocols, underground utilities. She waved me off with a smirk, saying everything was handled, but I could see her left hand trembling as she held the microphone. Back inside I orchestrated the next step. Using my credentials I rerouted a legitimate subway expansion team toward my property for a priority emergency inspection, scheduled for dawn the next day. These were real professionals, men and women with hard hats carrying sealed orders and official signage, and when they arrived with their trucks and fencing it would look like the city itself had claimed the project. I also had the city's legal department draft a preliminary cease and desist order based on the violations I had documented, ready to be served at a moment's notice. The thrill of this plan mixed with the satisfaction of watching Karen dig her own hole literally and figuratively. That evening, as the neighborhood quieted and the HOA volunteers packed up, our covert crews worked under the streetlights installing bright orange stakes and surveying equipment that would be impossible to miss in the morning. They placed bold city transit signs along the perimeter with the official seal and barcodes that linked directly to our website. It was a silent invasion, the real subway men pushing aside the make-believe ones. I stood at my window sipping bourbon, listening to the hum of our underground drills that were precise and legal, knowing that by sunrise Karen would arrive to find her playground fenced off and her narrative crumbling. Around midnight my phone buzzed with a message from my engineering friend that read all sensors in place ready for Phase 2. I texted back good work and scrolled through the photos they had taken of the tunnel beneath my lawn, the old brick arches still intact, a perfect launch point for the actual expansion my agency had been planning but hadn't found an access site for. In a twist even I hadn't anticipated, Karen had unknowingly solved one of our biggest logistical problems by digging right where we needed to be. Now I was poised to take her illegal effort and transform it into an official project, funded and protected, with her name forever tied to the disaster. Before going to bed I walked once more to the edge of the pit, the smell of damp earth heavy in the air, the neighborhood eerily silent after the day's chaos. In the faint light of a street lamp I could see the spray-painted arrows still marking my driveway, absurd symbols of their imagined future. I whispered to the empty site that tomorrow everything would change. The excavators sat idle like giant insects, their claws frozen mid-bite. Above me the stars blinked faintly as if waiting for the show. I turned back toward my house, the badge still warm in my pocket, the plan locked in my mind, and slept deeply knowing that by sunrise the HOA would discover they had been building their empire on my battlefield, and that the Transit Authority was no longer their silent victim but their unseen adversary, ready to strike. Dawn broke with a strange stillness that didn't last more than a few minutes before the rumble of diesel engines shattered it, but this time it wasn't Karen's machines making the noise. From my porch I watched 3 official Transit Authority trucks roll up, painted in unmistakable city colors, their crews stepping out with clipboards, hard hats, and the full confidence of people who belong exactly where they are. They began erecting fences around the pit with bright orange panels stamped with bar codes and legal warnings, and for the first time since this fiasco began, I felt my heart slow to a calm and deliberate beat. Karen's SUV screeched to a halt at the curb, her pastel blazer now paired with frantic gestures as she ran to intercept the workers. She demanded to know who they were, why they were on her site, and what authority they had. One of the supervisors, an old colleague of mine who knew exactly what was happening, politely handed her a thick envelope with an embossed seal. I could see her face pale as she read the words cease and desist. She spun toward her volunteers and tried to rally them, but most stepped back, glancing at the badges on the workers' chests and realizing they were in way over their heads. Cameras she had invited for her morning publicity stunt were already rolling, and the footage would not be the triumphant grand opening she had planned, but the public unraveling of a fraud. I strolled down to the edge of the pit like a man arriving late to a party, coffee in one hand, the other hand casually holding my badge. When she saw it, her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping on a dock. I introduced myself in a voice calm enough to cut through the chaos, explained that I was not only the homeowner but the Transit Authority chief, and that every piece of paper she had brandished for the past week was invalid. Reporters caught every word, their microphones thrust forward, their lenses capturing Karen's flushed face as she tried to stammer out excuses. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The legal documents, the city crews, the cameras did the work for me. As the crews sealed off the dig site and began taking soil samples and core readings, I explained to the gathered neighbors what was really happening. The tunnel beneath my lawn, forgotten by city planners decades ago, was being integrated into an official expansion of the subway system. Far from being a rogue project, it was now a fully funded municipal effort with safety protocols, engineering oversight, and scheduled completion date. Karen had unwittingly located our ideal access point and had spent HOA funds illegally digging into my property. The fines alone would bankrupt her board, but more importantly she had handed me a political victory on a silver platter. Reporters loved the story of a suburban HOA trying to fake its way into city transit power, and they loved even more the image of a quiet homeowner revealing himself as the chief official in charge. Karen tried one last desperate move, claiming I had orchestrated everything to entrap her, but the evidence in the envelope demolished that narrative. She had signed contracts with phony contractors, misused HOA funds, and filed false permits under a defunct department. The cameras recorded every tear, every sputtered accusation. Neighbors who had cheered her days ago now backed away, whispering as they watched her empire collapse. My crews, meanwhile, were already stabilizing the pit and preparing to integrate it into the real project. It was a flawless transition, like swapping a fake play for the real one mid-performance. By afternoon the news vans had doubled and social media was ablaze with clips of Karen being handed the cease and desist, of me calmly explaining the truth, of the Transit Authority crews moving in with surgical precision. Headlines popped up online about HOA overreach gone wrong, about the homeowner who turned out to be the boss. My office called to congratulate me on neutralizing a potential scandal and for securing the access point we'd been searching for. Even the mayor sent a brief message saying nice play. The ribbon-cutting ceremony happened 3 months later on a crisp autumn morning. Where my lawn had once been there now stood a gleaming steel and glass entrance to the subway, complete with art panels depicting the history of the neighborhood. Crowds gathered as city officials praised the project, noting its efficiency and unexpected origins. I took the podium last, looking out at the cameras, the commuters, the very neighbors who had once clapped for Karen's dig, and thanked the HOA for their unwitting assistance in identifying the perfect location. The line drew a laugh from the crowd and a camera cut to Karen in the back, now no longer president, facing a mountain of legal trouble and a special assessment vote from the very residents she had led into disaster. When I cut the ribbon and the doors slid open with a hiss of air, the first train waited below, its cars gleaming, its operators waving. I descended the steps into the station built partly from the cavity Karen had carved, the tiles shining under the lights, the name of the stop etched into the wall, a name I had chosen myself as a nod to my grandmother who had raised me on the idea that public service can be a quiet kind of power. As the train pulled away I looked back one last time at the street above, at the house where it had all begun, and felt the satisfying weight of a victory earned not by shouting but by patience, knowledge, and precision. The story would live on long after Karen's resignation, a cautionary tale about overreach and arrogance, and as I settled into my seat and the tunnel swallowed us into the city, I allowed myself a small smile at the thought that the HOA had built me my own private subway entrance and paid for it with their own downfall.